He placed the papers in front of me as if I were already halfway gone from this world. "Mom, sign here. It's just a form." That was the sentence. Short, careless, said with the same tone one uses to pass salt at dinner. But I've lived long enough to know that when someone rushes you to sign something, it's never just anything. Not when you're 72. Not when your hands still shake after burying a husband who read every contract twice. The first page looked harmless. Electricity account authorization, nothing unusual. My name spelled correctly for once. Daniel stood beside me, pretending to straighten a picture on the wall, pretending not to watch my every breath. I've known that boy for 44 years. I know when he's anxious. His shoulders stiffen, just a little, like he's bracing for a reaction he hopes won't come. I turned the page. The second sheet had smaller print, the kind men like my husband used to call the devil's handwriting, and I, foolish old woman that I sometimes am, almost signed without looking. Almost. But something caught my eye. The word transfer. It sat there like a stain on a clean tablecloth. Transfer of property management. Transfer of limited rights. Transfer of God knows what, because I'd only skimmed 2 lines before my heart tightened. I looked up at my son. Daniel had always been handsome, with his polished shoes and expensive watch he bought long before he could actually afford one. But today, there was something else in his face. Impatience, maybe. Or certainty that I would do what I always do. Nod, smile, sign. Trust him blindly. "Why does the second page mention assets?" I asked. He blinked too fast. "It's standard, Mom. Everyone signs that. Just a consolidation form for the bills. You wouldn't understand all the legal jargon." That last sentence, oh, how neatly it slid between my ribs. You wouldn't understand. I've heard it my whole life. When I was a young wife learning how to stretch $1 into 3 meals. When I worked nights so he could go to a better high school. When I held his daughter so his wife could get her nails done. You wouldn't understand. As if age takes away sense instead of sharpening it. I lowered my eyes to the page again. My husband, God rest him, taught me something before cancer took him. He said, "Maggie, read the second page of anything. The lies live there." And he was right. They always do. I traced a line with my finger slowly, carefully, while Daniel pretended to check his phone. He wasn't fooling anyone. I could feel his restlessness like heat in the room. If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you. I waited a moment before speaking. When you get old, silence becomes your ally. It makes the younger ones uneasy. "Daniel," I said softly, "come sit down." He gave a quick laugh. "Mom, I'm in a hurry. I really—" "Sit," I repeated. He sat. He never used to refuse me when he was small. Funny how some old habits remain even when love grows thin. I slid the paper toward him with one finger. "Explain this part. The part about granting you authority to act on my behalf regarding property decisions." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the window as if expecting rescue from a passing stranger. "That's— Mom, that's nothing. Just a routine clause. A routine clause that gives you power over my house." He gave me a look, annoyed first, then cautious. "You're overthinking this. You always get so—" I didn't let him finish. "Your father would have never handed anyone a pen without explaining every line." He exhaled sharply, annoyed now. "Dad's gone, Mom, and you need help. I'm trying to make your life easier." my life easier. That was the moment something inside me shifted, so quietly I almost didn't notice. A thin line, drawn somewhere deep. I had not drawn such lines in many years. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking like dry branches. "I'll read this later. Carefully." He forced a smile. "Mom, there's no later. The agent needs this tonight." "I'm sure he does," I said. I folded the papers with steady hands, steadier than I felt, and set them aside. "But he won't get it tonight." He didn't hide the irritation then. "Mom?" I said no. The words tasted strange, firm, unfamiliar, clean. I hadn't used that tone with my son in decades. I watched confusion flicker across his face, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt utterly, quietly awake. Then I shooed him toward the door, the form still lying untouched on the table between us, like something that had finally revealed its true weight. Daniel came back that evening with the same expression he used to wear as a teenager when he thought he could talk himself out of trouble. Calm on the surface, restless underneath. I heard his car before I saw him. He always parks too close to my rose bushes, no matter how many times I tell him not to. The engine shut off, then that familiar pause where he gathers himself. I've lived long enough to recognize when someone rehearses a speech. I stayed in the kitchen, wiping down a counter already clean. It's funny, at my age I can sense the mood of my own home. The walls stiffened as if preparing for company they didn't trust. He walked in without knocking. He used to knock. Even last year he knocked. Funny how disrespect arrives quietly, on soft feet, pretending to be normal routine. "Mom?" he said, his voice overly warm, stretched thin like cheap fabric. "You left things tense earlier. I just wanted to clear the air." I turned off the faucet slowly, drying my hands. No air needs clearing. I simply refused to sign something I didn't understand. His smile twitched. "It's not that complicated." "You're making it bigger than it is." I watched him take a seat at my table, like a man who believes every chair belongs to him by birthright. His suit was still crisp from work, tie loosened, as if to show me how busy, how important he was. "You didn't explain it," I said. "It was just a bill form," he insisted. "A consolidation. You know how utilities are these days. They bury everything under piles of paperwork. I was trying to help." I sat across from him. It's strange, after decades of motherhood, how little distance there can be between your love for someone and your suspicion of them. Those two feelings barely touched in me before. Tonight they did. "Help?" I repeated softly. His eyes flickered. A man who lies hates the echo of his own words. He pushed a hand through his hair. "Mom, look. Lena thinks you're under too much stress managing the house alone. She worries about you. We both do. This form would let us make decisions on your behalf if something happened." "If something happened," I said, "I still have a mind. I still have rights." "Mom, come on," he sighed. "You're 72. "And you're 44, I replied. "That doesn't make you my guardian." He didn't like that. I could see the impatience creeping in, the way his jaw tightened. "I didn't mean it that way." "But that's exactly what the paper says, Daniel." He shifted in his seat, and that's when she appeared. Lena. She stepped inside without looking at me first, as if I were part of the furniture she'd grown tired of. Tall, sleek, polished, like everything Daniel admired these days. Her perfume drifted in before her voice. "Oh, good," she said lightly. "You two are talking." I watched her walk to my table like someone inspecting potential real estate. Margaret, she began with a smile that never touched her eyes. Daniel told me about the mix-up earlier. I know legal documents can be overwhelming at your age. Truly, I get it. At your age. A small phrase, yet it sits heavily, like a book placed on a weak shelf. I'm not overwhelmed, I said. I simply read what was in front of me. Lena leaned one hand on the chair. Well, that's admirable. But we're trying to help. Managing property, finances. It can become too much for someone who lives alone. We just want to support you. I looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes weren't worried. They were calculating. Smooth as glass. She wasn't here for my well-being. She was here to manage the situation. Daniel added quickly, "We're not trying to take anything from you." That's comforting to hear, I said, given that the form would have allowed exactly that. The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it was heavy. Lena's smile vanished for a brief second before she adjusted it again. Well, she said, maybe we should all slow down. Let Daniel handle the paperwork going forward. It's too easy for misunderstandings to happen. I folded my hands in my lap. No, I'll handle my own affairs. The words were simple, quiet, but I felt something settle inside me, a firmness, a spine. Daniel leaned back, exasperated. Mom, don't be stubborn. We're trying to protect you. I don't need protection from my own life, I said, just from deception. Lena's face hardened, just for a breath. Daniel looked embarrassed, then irritated. I think you're being unfair, he muttered. And I think you're underestimating me, I answered. The clock ticked behind us. Slow, steady, indifferent. My husband used to say time tells the truth better than people do. And sitting there, across from my son and his polished wife, I felt time whisper something I'd ignored for too long. They thought I was weak. They thought I trusted too blindly. But the second page of that form had changed something. Quietly, yes, but unmistakably. I stood, and the chair legs scraped softly across the floor. Behind me, neither of them moved. I could feel their eyes on my back as I walked to the counter, not because they were worried, but because they were finally unsure of me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my back, listening to the old house breathe, pipes settling, wood expanding, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Funny how a home becomes a living thing after enough years with it. I knew every sound, every rhythm, and I could tell tonight it was uneasy, as if the walls themselves sensed something shifting. I kept replaying Daniel's face in my mind. Not the annoyed one, no, that expression I'd grown used to. What stayed with me was the flicker of alarm when I said no. I'd seen that exact look once before, decades ago, when he was 12 and tried to sneak his report card into the trash. Back then, I found it almost tender, the innocent panic of a boy caught. But now, it had a different weight. A grown man doesn't panic unless he risks losing something he believes he owns. Around 2 a.m, I got up. My joints protested, but I'd lived with pain long enough to know how to move through it like a cold fog. I put on my robe and went into the small study where I keep old boxes, memories shoved into corners because no one asks for them anymore. I opened the drawer where I keep documents, bank statements, tax returns, my husband's letters, the insurance papers. George used to keep everything labeled neatly. Even after 8 years without him, his handwriting still sits there on folders, steady as the man himself. Seeing it always gives me a moment's pause, as if he might walk through the door any second and growl about me being awake at this hour. I pulled out a stack of old envelopes Daniel once asked me to keep, just in case. Receipts from loans I helped him with, breakdowns of medical bills he swore he'd repay, joint statements from that business venture he wanted to start 10 years ago. All the ways I tried to support him. All the ways he forgot to thank me. Or maybe he didn't forget. Maybe he simply never thought he needed to. I sat down at the desk and laid everything out. When you're young, you look at paperwork and see clutter. At my age, you see a map. Where you went wrong, where someone else did, where things slowly shifted without you noticing. Page after page, I saw it. The pattern. Daniel never asked about my health without following it up with a request for help. He never came to visit unless he wanted something. Every birthday gift he gave me came with a condition attached. Sign this, approve that, talk to this loan officer, give a reference here. Even the dinners he invited me to had a purpose, usually tied to impressing someone or getting access to something he thought I controlled. One memory rose so sharply it almost stung. The day George died. Daniel held my shoulders at the funeral, telling me he'd take care of everything. "You won't be alone, Mom," he promised. And I believed him. But grief makes fools of us all. Within weeks, he was telling me to sell the house. "Too much maintenance," he said. "Too much risk." I didn't sell. George and I built our life here. But I remember the irritation in Daniel's eyes when I refused. Back then, I dismissed it as stress. Now I know better. And then Lena's voice echoed through my thoughts. "At your age?" That phrase carried a quiet cruelty, a dismissal disguised as concern. I'd swallowed many such phrases over the years from her, always for Daniel's sake. Small stings I pretended not to feel. I began sorting the papers by date. The pile of debts Daniel owed me grew thicker than I'd realized. Funny how generosity blinds you to the arithmetic of your own life. I found a receipt from when he and Lena remodeled their kitchen. $12,000 from my account, marked simply as temporary. That was 7 years ago. I kept the receipt only because George taught me to keep every paper. But Daniel never mentioned paying it back. Never even brought it up again. I set the receipt aside, then another and another. Little betrayals. Tiny cuts. And suddenly, the picture grew painfully clear. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment from him. It was a pattern I had enabled. For years. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I didn't cry. Tears are something that left me slowly over the past decade, like hair turning gray. Instead, I felt a heaviness in my chest. Not grief, but recognition. This is who he has become. And I played a part in it. My husband once told me, "Maggie, love your boy with all your heart, but don't let him take advantage of that heart." I remember laughing at him, telling him Daniel would never do such a thing, that he was a good boy. And he was. But boys grow into men, and men grow into the shape of what they're allowed to be. The room was cold by then. The clock on the wall ticked evenly, almost gently, as if reminding me that time moves on whether or not we're ready to follow. I gathered the documents into a neat pile. Then I placed them back in the drawer where they belonged. Not hidden, just waiting. Waiting for the moment they'd be needed. As I closed the drawer, I caught my reflection in the window. An older woman, yes. Wrinkled, gray-haired. Slower than she once was. But in her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen for a long time. Not fear, not confusion. Something steady. Something awake. Something ready. I didn't tell Daniel or Lena where I went the next morning. Some things are better done in silence, like stitching up a wound before anyone notices you're bleeding. I took the bus downtown, the old green line George and I used to ride when our car broke down in the winter of '82. The city looked different now, new glass buildings, new faces, but inside I felt something familiar, a steadiness, the same one I had back when I handled our bills alone while George worked night shifts. The law office was on the third floor of a brick building that had survived at least 5 mayors and 2 economic crises. The elevator groaned on the way up. I didn't mind. Some things that creak still hold strong. When I reached the door, Harris and Bloom, attorneys at law, I felt a strange tremor in my chest. Not fear, more like the tightening of a muscle long unused. I knocked lightly, and a young woman with bright red glasses ushered me inside. "Mrs. Holloway?" she asked. I nodded. "Mr. Harris will see you shortly." I sat in the waiting area, watching sunlight fall across the wooden floor, listening to muffled voices behind closed doors. I remembered coming here once before, with George after his first heart attack. We had updated our will together, holding hands the whole time. He squeezed my fingers every time the lawyer said something uncomfortable, as if to remind me he was still there. When Mr. Harris finally appeared, he looked older than I remembered. White hair, deeper wrinkles around the eyes, but the same calm, thoughtful expression. He shook my hand gently. "Maggie," he said, as though I were an old friend. "It's been a long time. Come in." I followed him into his office, a small room lined with books that looked as though they'd never been opened but were too dignified to collect dust. I sat across from him, placing the stack of documents on the desk. He glanced at them, then at my face. "Tell me," he said quietly. I took a breath. Daniel brought me papers to sign, said they were for utilities. But the second page, I unfolded the form, smoothing the corner with my hand. Mentions transferring authority over my assets to him, property decisions, banking powers. His eyebrows lifted just slightly. Did he explain the clause? No. And did you sign anything? No. He nodded once, slowly. Good. That single word, for the first time in months, made me feel something close to pride. He adjusted his glasses and began reading the documents carefully, line by line. I watched his eyes move, the way his finger traced certain sentences. After several minutes, he leaned back. "This is not a utilities form," he said. "It's a limited durable power of attorney packaged inside a service agreement. It would give your son authority over your home, accounts, and decisions, should he choose to use it that way." "Use it how?" I asked, though I already knew. He folded his hands. "In the wrong situation, it could leave you without legal control of your own property." For a moment, the room felt smaller, like the air had thickened. Even though part of me expected this, hearing it aloud made everything real in a way that silent suspicion never could. "Maggie," he said gently, "has Daniel tried anything like this before?" "Not directly," I answered, "but he's been pressuring and careless with money, and lately impatient, as if he's running out of time." Mr. Harris pursed his lips thoughtfully. "Financial desperation can make people behave recklessly, even toward their own families." I felt my throat tighten. "Do I need to be worried?" He didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. "Worried," he said finally. "No. Cautious? Absolutely." We discussed options, protective measures, safeguards, ways to ensure no one could access my accounts or property without my explicit consent. He explained everything in a steady, unhurried tone, like a doctor giving directions after surgery. Not alarming, but honest. When he finished, he leaned forward. You did the right thing coming here today. I nodded. I didn't want trouble. But I won't be caught off guard. That, he said with a small smile, is the voice of the Margaret I remember. I smiled faintly back. Some compliments carry real weight because they come from someone who saw you before life weathered you down. He prepared a document for me, a formal note stating I had declined the power of attorney, along with instructions to safeguard my signature from any misuse. He also gave me a list of banks to contact, just in case Daniel had attempted anything else without my knowledge. As I gathered my things, he hesitated. Maggie, I met Daniel years ago, when he was still in college. He was bright, ambitious. But I remember George saying something once. Something about Daniel believing rules were suggestions. Yes, my husband had said that too, more than once. He's my son, I said quietly. And that, Mr. Harris replied, is what makes all of this painful. I left the office with my papers tucked securely under my arm. The hallway felt brighter than before, the air lighter. Not because the problem was solved, far from it, but because for the first time in a long time, I had taken a step for myself. Not for Daniel, not for peace, not to avoid an argument. Just for me. When I stepped outside, the wind was cold, but it felt honest against my face. When I returned home from the lawyer's office, the house felt colder than usual, not in temperature, but in atmosphere, like a place bracing for unwelcome company. And it didn't take long before the sound of a car door slammed in my driveway. Too loud, too forceful. Daniel had arrived. Again. He didn't bother with the usual half-hearted knock. He strode in as if he owned the place. Maybe in his mind he already did. Mom, he said, his voice clipped. Why haven't you answered my calls? I set my purse down slowly. One thing I've learned as I've aged, rushing only benefits the person who wants to pressure you. I hung up my coat, smoothing the sleeve, and only then looked at him. I've been busy, I said. He scoffed. Busy doing what? There it was again, that tone. The one that suggested my life was too small to contain actual responsibilities. I walked to the kitchen, leaving him to follow like a frustrated shadow. I needed time to think, I said. About the papers, about everything. Daniel exhaled dramatically. Mom, it wasn't a big deal. You're making this complicated. What's complicated, I answered, opening the cabinet for tea, is that you weren't honest with me. He flinched just slightly, then masked it with irritation. You're being dramatic. No, I said quietly. I'm being careful. For a moment, he simply stared at me. Really stared, as if seeing someone unfamiliar in my place. Maybe he was. I suppose it must be unsettling when the person you expect to yield suddenly doesn't bend at all. Just then, the door opened again. Lena's voice floated in, sharp and bright like cold metal. Daniel? Oh, you're both here. She walked into the kitchen with a smile that reminded me of polished glass. Smooth, reflective, impossible to truly see through. Her eyes scanned my face, searching for cracks. Margaret, she said sweetly, I hope you've had time to reconsider that misunderstanding yesterday. Misunderstanding? I repeated. Yes, she said, settling onto a stool as if she were hosting the conversation. The little confusion over the forms. Daniel explained that you got the wrong idea and... I read the document, I interrupted. The idea was very clear. Her smile tightened, but she kept it in place. Well, since you're feeling overwhelmed, perhaps Daniel and I can sit down with you and go through your mail, bills, accounts. No, I said. The word came out calm, almost gentle, but it landed like a stone. Lena blinked once, twice. Daniel frowned, arms crossing defensively. "Mom," he said, "please don't start this." "I'm not starting anything," I replied. "I'm simply making a decision." Lena leaned forward. "Margaret, you're being stubborn. At your age, managing finances alone can be—" "What did you call it yesterday?" I asked. "Overwhelming?" She hesitated. "I didn't mean it that way." "Yes, you did," I said. "And that's all right. You said your truth. Now let me say mine." Both of them fell quiet. Not out of respect, I think, but surprise. "I've managed this home for 49 years, I said. "I paid bills when your husband couldn't find work. I refinanced this house when Daniel was in college and needed money. I worked nights, I stretched every dollar, and I did it without anyone explaining forms to me." Daniel's jaw tightened again. "Why are you dragging up the past?" "Because it's relevant," I answered. Silence again. Even the kitchen clock seemed to stop clicking. I placed the tea bag in my mug and poured hot water, letting the steam rise slowly between us. Only after a long moment did I continue. "I know what that document was," I said. "And I'm not signing it." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mom, you're misinterpreting everything. I wouldn't do anything to hurt you." "You already did," I said softly, "by assuming I wouldn't notice." That cut through him more than I expected. He opened his mouth, closed it, then ran a hand over his face. Lena finally spoke, her tone cooler now. "We just thought it would be easier if you trusted us to manage things." "I do trust family," I said. "But trust requires honesty." Daniel muttered, "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion." "And you," I said, turning to him, "have forgotten who raised you." The words hung in the room, neither sharp nor loud, just true. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Daniel's expression softened for a moment, almost uncertain, as if he couldn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. Lena looked away, smoothing her blouse, her patience stretched thin. "I need some space," I said finally. "Both of you should go home." Daniel blinked. "Are you serious?" "Yes." "But we're trying to help." "No," I said. "You're trying to control something that doesn't belong to you." They exchanged glances, silent, irritated, confused. Lena stood first. "We'll talk later, Margaret." Daniel hesitated, then followed her toward the door. He paused once, but I didn't look up. I didn't need to. When the door finally shut, I let out a long, slow breath, not of relief, but of recognition. Something in me, long buried, had surfaced again. Not anger, not pride, just the quiet understanding that the world shifts when you finally stop agreeing to shrink. The house was quiet after they left. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that lets thoughts grow louder than they should. I stood for a while in the kitchen, hands resting on the counter, feeling the faint tremor that age gives you when emotions run too deep. Not fear. Just the body remembering it isn't 30 anymore. Eventually, I returned to the study, the place where the truth waited in neat stacks of paper. I switched on the old lamp, its yellow light spilling across the desk, and pulled open the drawer where I'd placed everything the night before. I thought I'd only glance at it again, maybe rearrange the folders, reassure myself that I hadn't imagined the pattern I'd seen. But the moment I opened the first envelope, the weight of the past years came down with startling clarity. The earliest document was 10 years old, a loan I gave Daniel so he could stabilize finances after he and Lena bought their first house. I remember that conversation vividly, how he sounded embarrassed, almost humble, how I wrote the check without hesitation, thinking it would help them find their footing. I never asked for repayment. I assumed it would come naturally. It never did. I set it aside and opened the next folder. More receipts, more transfers. 1,000 here, 3,000 there. One labeled emergency medical bill, which I remember paying on the spot because Daniel said the hospital was pressuring them. Later, when I visited for dinner, I overheard Lena telling a friend they were so grateful insurance covered everything. Insurance. Not me. I pulled out another paper, an invoice from a contractor, $8,000 for a kitchen remodel. I stared at it for a long time, remembering how excited Lena had been about the renovation, how she'd bragged about choosing imported tiles. I remember Daniel telling me quietly, "We're overwhelmed this month, Mom. Could you help? Just temporarily." Temporarily had become a lifetime word in that house. I kept going. The deeper I dug, the more obvious the picture became. Daniel didn't ask me for favors. He built expectations, and I allowed it. Every transfer was a small surrender disguised as kindness. Every check I wrote was another stitch in a net he wrapped around me, tightening so slowly I barely felt it. I found an email he'd printed years ago, one he'd asked me to hold on to just in case. It was correspondence between him and a financial advisor. The email said, "Once my mother's house is secured, we'll be able to refinance and move forward with the investment plan." Secured, that was the word. He had planned this long before yesterday's document. My breath grew shallow for a moment. Not from shock, no. Shock had passed. This was the ache of recognition, the kind that takes its time settling into your bones. I laid the email down carefully, as if it were something fragile, though the truth inside it was solid and cold. Next, I opened an envelope labeled MISC. Inside were photocopies of my signature. I froze. I touched the corner of one page with a fingertip. Not shaky, not forged. Photocopied. Likely from times I signed things without thinking, perhaps at family gatherings, or when Daniel handed me something quick to look over. Why did he need copies of my signature? I already knew the answer. It tasted bitter. I kept going because stopping felt worse. I found bank statements from 2 years ago, unfamiliar transfers I didn't remember authorizing. Small amounts, but regular. I checked the dates. They matched the period when Daniel was pressuring me about downsizing the house. Funny how truth hides in plain sight until you're ready to see it. I leaned back in the chair, letting my eyes rest on the ceiling. The house creaked lightly, the way it always did at night. But tonight, the sound felt different. Less like a home settling, more like something stirring awake. My husband once told me that the people you love have the greatest potential to blind you. Not because they mean to, but because you want so badly to see them as better than they are. I had spent years excusing Daniel's behavior, smoothing over his impatience, pretending his carelessness was simply stress. But stress doesn't explain preparing documents that hand him my life. It doesn't explain copying my signature. It doesn't explain hiding debts and asking for money with invented emergencies. This wasn't a bad week for him. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, careful, quiet, practiced. The realization didn't bring anger. Anger would have been easier. No. What settled over me was something steadier, something that felt like the spine I forgot I still had. I gathered the papers into a new stack, not hidden, not buried. A stack meant to remind me of a truth I wouldn't ignore anymore. Then I closed the drawer and sat for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the lamp, feeling the room steady around me. When I finally stood, I knew exactly what the next step would be. Claire came by the next afternoon without calling first. She does that sometimes, and I've never minded. With her, unexpected visits don't feel like intrusions. They feel like reminders that someone in this family still knows what affection looks like. I heard her footsteps on the porch, softer than Daniel's, lighter than Lena's. She knocked gently, then peeked through the window with a smile that vanished the moment she saw my face. "Grandma?" she asked, stepping inside. "You look tired. What happened?" I sat at the kitchen table, the papers still in a stack nearby, though I'd covered them with a cloth before she arrived. Even so, she noticed something. Claire notices everything. She has that same quiet sharpness my husband had, gentle in appearance, but nothing escapes her. "Sit down, sweetheart," I said. She slipped into the chair across from me, her long hair falling over her shoulder. She's 21 now, but I still see the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, believing they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. "Did Dad say something to you?" she asked. "You two argue?" It was instinct, old and foolish, to protect Daniel even then. To pretend everything was fine. But the habit cracked under the weight of the last few days. I folded my hands. "He brought me some papers. Told me to sign them." Claire frowned. "What kind of papers?" "Ones I wasn't meant to look at closely." Her eyes widened, worry deepening. "Grandma, what did he try to do?" I hesitated, not because I doubted her loyalty, but because there is a special pain in admitting your own child has crossed a line you hoped he never would. "He wanted control over the house," I said quietly, "and my accounts." Claire didn't speak for a moment. She stared at me, her jaw tense. Then she looked down at her hands, twisting the ring her mother gave her years ago. "I knew something was off," she whispered. "I've known for a while." I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" She took a slow breath, the kind you take before deciding whether telling the truth will hurt more than keeping it. "Dad talks about your house a lot. Not to you, to Mom. To me sometimes when he forgets I'm old enough to understand. He says it's too much responsibility for you, that it's just a matter of time. I didn't think he'd do something like this." Her voice trembled then, but she straightened quickly, ashamed of showing emotion. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "It's all right," I said. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It's not. He shouldn't treat you like that. Neither of them should." I watched her eyes fill, though she blinked fast to keep the tears from falling. She's stronger than she thinks, stronger than her parents in many ways. She leaned back, thinking. "Do you remember the night Dad yelled at me for buying that used car? He told me I was irresponsible." She let out a humorless laugh. "But then I saw their credit card bills a few weeks later. They're drowning, Grandma. And instead of fixing their spending, they're looking at your house like it's a lifeboat." Her words landed heavily, but cleanly. The truth has a particular clarity when spoken by someone who has nothing to gain. I squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry you've had to carry that alone." Claire shook her head. "I just didn't know how to tell you without hurting you. And I didn't want you to think I was trying to turn you against Dad." She paused, voice softening. "But I've watched how he treats you, and how Mom does. And I hate it." It was strange, comforting and painful at the same time, to hear aloud what I had quietly endured for years, but hearing it from her made it easier to face. "Claire," I said, I'm taking steps to protect myself. She looked relieved, then determined. Good. You should. And Grandma, don't trust anything Dad brings you to sign. Not ever. A small, sad smile touched her lips. He thinks you're fragile. He thinks you'll just agree because you love him. I breathed out slowly. I did that for a long time. She nodded. I know. We sat in silence for a moment, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint birds outside. It felt peaceful, almost like the old days when she would sit at this same table doing homework while I baked. Are you angry at him? She asked finally. Anger's not the right word, I said, disappointed and awake. Claire nodded, like she understood that perfectly. Before she left, she gave me a hug, tight, warm, lingering. The sort of hug that says she sees me, not as an obligation, but as someone who matters. I'm here for you, she whispered. When the door closed behind her, the house felt less lonely. Not because anything was solved, but because someone else finally knew the truth. And because, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was walking into this storm alone. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I'm not sure why, age, habit, worry, but I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of a decision pressing against my ribs. Protecting myself. It sounded simple when I said it to Claire. It felt much heavier now that it had to be turned into action. Still, I got up. My joints argued with me, but I've never let aching bones dictate my choices. I washed my face, tied my hair back, and put on my warmest coat. The house seemed to watch me as I locked the door behind me, as if it, too, was holding its breath. Banks always smell the same, like paper, ink, and polished tile. I stepped inside, nodding to a young teller who greeted me with the kind of cheerful voice that doesn't yet understand what life can take from you. At the service desk, a man in his 40s stood up and extended a hand. Mrs. Holloway, I'm Jacob. Please have a seat. I sat, gripping my purse a little tighter than I meant to. I need to make some changes, I said. Important ones. He smiled politely. Of course. What kind? I took a breath. I want to revoke all authorized access to my accounts. Every single one. No shared privileges. No automatic transfers. Nothing connected to my son or his household. Jacob blinked, surprised. But to his credit, he didn't ask unnecessary questions. All right. We can begin with removing names from secondary access privileges. No, I said firmly. I want every authorization reviewed, every transfer, every recurring payment, every signature on file. Something in my voice must have told him this wasn't a minor adjustment. He nodded and pulled up my information on the screen. One moment while I check access logs, he said. He typed quietly, and I watched the reflection of the screen in his glasses. A few minutes later, he frowned, leaning closer. Mrs. Holloway, did you authorize a monthly transfer to an account ending in 4382? No, I said. I don't recognize that. He hesitated. It's been active for 17 months. My stomach tightened. How much? $400 a month. 400, quietly taken, like a whisper of money disappearing into the dark. A small enough amount that I might never have noticed, but consistent enough to matter. I want it stopped, I said. Of course. As he clicked through more windows, he cleared his throat. There are also 3 credit lines connected to your profile. 2 appear dormant. 1 is active, with recent charges. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not anger, not shame, something in between. Pull up the charges. He read them to me gently, as if softening his tone would make them smaller. Grocery store, electronics, online purchases, a hotel booking. Nothing extravagant, but none of it mine. My signature sat on the authorization form in the system. Except it wasn't my signature. It was the photocopied version, the same one I'd found in Daniel's papers. I didn't sign that, I said. Jacob nodded solemnly. We can flag this immediately. It may require a fraud review. Fraud. The word sat between us like a heavy bowl of stones. Not the dramatic kind you see on television. No police sirens or courtroom standoffs. Just quiet, deliberate misuse. The kind people commit when they think no one will ever notice. When we finished revoking permissions, canceling transfers, freezing questionable accounts, and resetting passwords, Jacob printed out a stack of papers. All set, Mrs. Holloway. Your accounts are protected now, and no one else has access. I took the papers, my hand trembling slightly. Thank you. He paused, then spoke gently. If you need to talk to someone about unauthorized activity, we can connect you with a specialist. I shook my head. Not yet. I need to understand what I'm dealing with first. He nodded respectfully. I walked out of the bank into the cold morning light. The sky was pale blue, almost brittle. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the weight of everything settle. Protecting my finances was only the surface. Beneath it lay something far more painful, the recognition of how far my son had drifted, how long I'd allowed him to handle me instead of respect me. But beneath that pain, something else stirred. A steadiness, a quiet resolve. On the way home, I stopped at the corner bakery and bought myself a small cinnamon roll, something I rarely allowed because I'd always saved treats for when family visited. Today it felt appropriate, a small act of owning my life again. When I got home, the house greeted me with its silence, but it no longer felt like an empty silence. It felt like space. Mine, finally mine, without the shadow of someone else's plans hanging over it. I placed the bank papers next to the stack from the lawyer, two small fortresses standing side by side. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something close to safety. Daniel didn't wait long before showing up again. It was late afternoon when I heard his fists pounding on the door. No hesitation this time, no polite tap. Just raw impatience. The kind a man uses when he feels something slipping out of his hands. Mom! Open the door! I didn't rush. I wiped my hands, took off my apron, and walked slowly through the hallway. The older I get, the more I realize that moving at my own pace unsettles people who rely on urgency to gain control. When I finally opened the door, Daniel pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk, he snapped. All right, I said calmly, closing the door behind him. Talk. He paced the living room like a man searching for the right argument. Then he stopped, turning toward me with narrowed eyes. Why did the bank call me? He demanded. My heartbeat stayed steady. I don't know, I said. You'll have to ask them. They told me I'm no longer listed on your access privileges. His voice rose. Why would you do that? I let a small pause stretch between us. Because I didn't put you there. His face flushed. Mom, what are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. For a moment he looked genuinely startled. Then the defensiveness rushed in, thick as fog. This is ridiculous. You're acting paranoid. No, I said softly. I'm acting informed. He stared at me, thrown off by the calmness in my voice. Calmness disarms people who expect chaos. I've gone through my accounts, I continued. Transfers I never authorized, credit lines I never opened, charges I didn't make. That's impossible, he said quickly. You must have forgotten. I didn't forget. Then the bank made a mistake. I shook my head. The signature they have on file is a photocopy, not my hand. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted left, then right, the way they used to when he lied about breaking a vase as a boy. Except this time the stakes were different. This time he wasn't trying to avoid a scolding. He was trying to avoid consequences. Mom, he said, lowering his voice, listen to me. If you keep doing this, acting suspicious, canceling things, people will think you're losing your grip. They might even question whether you should be living alone. There it was, the threat wrapped in false concern, the kind of line people deliver softly so it sounds like advice, not leverage. I walked past him and sat down in my armchair. Daniel, I said, please sit. He didn't. He stood stiff, angry, as if sitting would concede something he wasn't prepared to give. All right, I continued. Then listen standing. I know what you've been doing, not just this week, for years, and I'm done pretending not to. That's not fair, he muttered. What's not fair is treating your mother like a failing resource. His jaw twitched. You're twisting everything. I'm reading everything, I corrected. Every document, every transfer, every lie. He flinched again. Small movements, but unmistakable. Mom, he said finally, I've been under pressure. You don't understand how hard things have been. Then you should have told me the truth, I said. Not taken the easy way, not made decisions that weren't yours to make. He exhaled sharply and walked toward the window, looking out as if the street might offer him an escape. You've put me in a terrible position, he said. If lenders see that access revoked, it'll raise flags. I was counting on having authority to... He cut himself off too late. I felt the words settle inside me like stones. Authority, I repeated quietly. He turned back, startled by his own slip. Mom? I didn't mean it like that. Yes, I said. You did. We stood in the same room, but the space between us felt like miles. There was a time when I would have softened then, when his guilt or panic would have pulled at my heart. But something had shifted. Memory, clarity, dignity. They formed a shell around me he could no longer crack. I am not your safety net, I said, and I am not your asset. He swallowed hard. So that's it? You're choosing to see me as the enemy? No, I said softly. I'm choosing to see you clearly. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It simply existed, unavoidable and honest. Daniel grabbed his coat without another word. He didn't slam the door, but the click of it closing felt louder than any shout. I stood by the window after he left, watching him walk to his car. His shoulders hunched, his steps uneven. But I didn't feel sorry for him this time. I just felt steady. And for the first time, I knew he felt it too. Lena arrived before noon the next day, and I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Daniel must have told her everything, or rather, everything from his side, painted with the colors that suited him. I saw her through the front window, quick steps, tight jaw, a woman marching into battle not for justice but for convenience. She didn't bother knocking gently. 2 sharp raps, then she pushed the door open before I had time to cross the hallway. Margaret, she said, voice clipped, we need to talk. I stepped aside calmly. Come in then. She walked in like she owned the place, like the walls should lean out of her way. Her coat was expensive, her hair immaculate, her perfume sharp enough to cut through the air. Everything about her demanded attention. Daniel is extremely upset, she began. He said you accused him of fraud. Fraud, Margaret. I didn't use that word, I said, closing the door. I said I found activities I didn't authorize. That's the same thing, she snapped. No, I replied, brushing past her toward the kitchen. It's not. She followed me, heels tapping against the floor in angry, precise beats. Do you realize how much stress you're putting him under? He's been trying to help you, and you're treating him like some criminal. I put the kettle on without looking at her. If he wanted to help, he could have started by telling me the truth. She crossed her arms. Oh, please. You're acting like you're perfectly capable of managing everything alone. At your age, you should be grateful someone cares enough to handle your affairs. There it was again. Those words. At your age. Not even hidden behind politeness this time. I turned to face her fully. I am capable, I said. And I have been managing my life without your guidance for longer than you've been alive. Lena laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. It was sharp, brittle. You're being dramatic. Daniel said you revoked his access at the bank. Do you know how humiliating that was? How irresponsible it looks? For him? I asked. Or for me? For the whole family, she snapped. People talk. They assume you're becoming unstable. I let a small silence stretch between us. Are you trying to intimidate me? Her eyes flickered. I'm trying to make you listen to reason. No, I said. You're trying to make me compliant. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Margaret, if you keep acting like this, you're going to force our hand. Force your hand to do what? I asked, though I already knew. She hesitated. Then, Daniel thinks you may need supervision, someone to help make decisions, maybe even someone appointed legally. The words slid toward me like cold water. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even blink. You won't get that. You don't know that. I do, I said, because I've already spoken to a lawyer. That stopped her. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise cracking through the armor she wore. You... what? I'm not as helpless as you imagine, I said. And I have every document, every transfer, every copied signature in a folder. If there's any legal question about who needs supervision, it won't be me. Color rose in her cheeks, anger, embarrassment, fear, all mixed together. She tried to recover, smoothing her blouse, but her hands trembled. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. No, I replied. I'm correcting one. The kettle whistled then, its soft rising note filling the room, like a reminder that life continues its ordinary rhythm, even while people unravel themselves. I poured the water, my movement slow, deliberate. Lena watched me with something new in her eyes. Not respect, not affection, but recognition. She was seeing me for the first time without the lens of her assumptions. You've talked to Claire, haven't you? She said suddenly. Yes, I answered. That girl doesn't know when to stay out of things. No, I said. She knows exactly when to step in. Lena pressed her lips together. She was losing ground, and she knew it. Margaret, she said finally, voice softer now. This isn't good for the family. Protecting myself, I said, is the best thing I've done for this family in years. She stared at me for a long moment, something like disbelief in her expression. Then she picked up her purse. I'll tell Daniel you're not cooperating, she said. You do that. She lingered for half a second, as if expecting me to call her back, to soften, to apologize as I had done so many times before. I didn't. She walked out, closing the door behind her with a controlled, quiet click. And when the house settled back into silence, it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The letter from Mr. Harris arrived 2 mornings later, slipped neatly through the slot in my door. I recognized the stationery before I even picked it up. Heavy paper. A lawyer's kind of paper. The kind that carries weight even before you read a word. I made myself tea first. Not out of calmness, but because small rituals keep you from shaking when you know your life is about to tilt again. The letter was brief. The court date has been set. Documentation submitted. I will represent you. That was all. Yet the simplicity of it settled something inside me. No drama, no fear, just a quiet step toward truth. Daniel didn't know yet. Lena, neither. I wondered how they'd react when they did. Not that it mattered. There comes a point when reaction becomes background noise, and action becomes the only thing you can hear. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I took the bus downtown again, my folder of documents tucked under my arm like a shield. Mr. Harris met me in the hallway, offering a small nod that spoke more comfort than any long speech could. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. No grand courtroom, no judge's bench high above us, just a modest chamber meant for procedural reviews. Still, my heart beat harder than usual, each thud reminding me that even quiet justice comes at a cost. Daniel arrived 5 minutes late, breathless, red-faced, carrying the expression of a man who didn't expect to be summoned to answer for anything. Lena trailed behind him, tension radiating off her like heat. When Daniel saw me seated beside Mr. Harris, his face twisted in something between disbelief and fear. "Mom," he hissed, "why didn't you tell me about this?" "Because you would have tried to stop me," I said. He opened his mouth, but before he could start, the clerk called the session to order. We took our places. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, looked at me with a kind of familiar tiredness. I imagined she'd seen far too many families sit where we sat now, pretending they still resembled something whole. Mr. Harris presented everything calmly. The attempted power of attorney transfer, the unauthorized financial activity, the photocopied signature, the pattern stretching back years. Daniel sputtered through explanations, stress, misunderstanding, concern for my well-being. Lena chimed in with phrases like family responsibility and miscommunication, but every word sounded thinner than the last. Lies lose their power when spoken under good lighting. The judge asked me if I felt pressured, if I understood the implications of the documents Daniel gave me. I told her the truth. Quietly. Plainly. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I simply said I had been misled, and that I feared the intentions behind the form were not as harmless as I was told. Daniel stared at me then, not angry, but stunned, as if he hadn't expected me to speak with such clarity, as if he'd forgotten I still had a voice that wasn't shaped by him. When it was over, the judge concluded decisively. The attempted authorization would be voided completely. Protective measures would be put in place. Further investigation might be necessary depending on the bank's findings. Daniel paled. Lena looked like she'd swallowed something too large. The judge's final words were simple. Mrs. Holloway retains full legal autonomy. Any future attempts to secure control of her property or accounts without proper procedure will be considered intentional misconduct. A gavel wasn't even used, just a soft thank you and dismissal. But it felt final. Outside the chamber, Daniel caught up to me. "Mom," he whispered harshly, "you made this so much worse than it needed to be." I looked at him. really looked at him. The boy he had been, the man he had become, the space between those two versions that I had failed to bridge. "No, Daniel," I said. "I finally made it honest." He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. Lena tugged his sleeve, urging him toward the elevator. He followed her, and I stood there for a moment, feeling the air shift, feeling years of quiet acquiescence loosen their grip. Mr. Harris walked me downstairs. "You did well," he said. I nodded, not proudly, not triumphantly, just steadily. "It was time," I said. And it was. Daniel didn't come the day after the hearing, or the day after that. I thought maybe silence would be our new language, and perhaps that would have been for the best. But on the third evening, just as I sat down with a book and a cup of chamomile tea, I heard a soft knock at the door. Not pounding, not impatience, something almost hesitant. I knew immediately it wasn't Lena. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there with his shoulders slightly hunched, as if he'd practiced appearing humbled. He held no folders, no envelopes, only a tight, uneasy expression. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked in slowly this time, looking around the house as though it had changed since he last stood in it. Nothing had changed, of course, only the balance between us. He sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. A posture I recognized from when he was a child trying to confess something without saying it directly. "I shouldn't have let it get this far," he murmured. Things have been hard. Harder than I told you." I took my chair across from him, leaving space between us. "You could have told me that," I said. His eyes flickered, shame or discomfort. It was hard to tell. "I didn't want you to worry or think I couldn't handle my life. And so you tried to handle mine instead?" He winced at that. "I wasn't trying to take anything from you." "Daniel," I said softly, "you were." He rubbed his face with both hands, the way people do when the truth presses too close to deny. "I'm sorry," he said. The words pushed out stiffly. I was overwhelmed. I thought if I could get ahead of things, everything would settle. "I didn't think you'd go to a lawyer." "That's the part that unsettles me," I replied. "Not that you were struggling, but that you assumed I would sign anything you put in front of me." He swallowed. "You always trusted me." "Yes," I said, "and you counted on that." Silence stretched between us, thin but taut. He looked down at his hands again. "I don't want things to be like this between us." I believed he meant that, but sincerity didn't erase what had happened. It only softened the edges. "I don't want a war," I said. "But I won't return to pretending everything is fine. Not after what I've learned." He nodded slowly. "I understand." But I wasn't sure he did. Not fully. Understanding requires change, and I didn't know yet whether he was capable of that or simply afraid of the consequences. "I'm going to step back for a while," I said gently. "From you, from Lena, from all of it. I need space to breathe without worrying about what I might be signing away." He looked up sharply. "So, you're cutting me out?" "No," I said. "I'm setting boundaries, something I should have done years ago." Daniel exhaled, defeated. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I said. "But you've lost the version of me who let things slide." We sat in quiet then, neither reaching for the other. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm. It was simply honest. Eventually, he stood. "I'll try to do better." I nodded. Trying is a start. He hesitated at the door, as if waiting for me to offer some reassurance, some softening. I didn't, and after a moment he stepped outside. When the door closed behind him, the house felt steady again. Not peaceful, but steady. The days after Daniel's visit passed with a stillness I hadn't felt in a long while. Not loneliness. No, I've known loneliness, and this wasn't it. This was something quieter, something like breathing clean air after being trapped too long in a room that smelled of other people's decisions. I began doing small things I'd postponed for years, not out of grand purpose, but because the house finally felt like it belonged to me again. I trimmed the rose bushes in the front yard, though my hands stiffened halfway through. I repainted the little wooden bench George built decades ago, the one that had faded under too many summers. I opened windows even when it was cold, letting fresh air sweep the cobwebs from places that hadn't been touched by wind in too long. One afternoon, I found a brochure tucked inside a drawer, an art class for seniors at the community center. I'd kept it months ago, but never went. Daniel once told me it was cute, but impractical. I signed up without thinking twice. The first class felt strange, sitting at a long table surrounded by people my age with their soft murmurs and tentative brushstrokes. I felt exposed at first, but then something loosened. Paint has a way of reminding you that your hands are still capable of creating, not just holding on. A woman named Eileen sat next to me. She was 76, with silver hair pinned neatly and eyes that sparkled as though she'd held onto mischief her whole life. We talked about gardens, old recipes, the aches that travel from one joint to the other like unwelcome visitors. She listened without rushing me, and I realized how rare that had become. "You have a steady hand," she said, watching me paint the curve of a willow tree. I smiled, only because I've had to steady myself for years. She nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant. After class, I walked home slowly, letting the late afternoon light follow me. My steps weren't fast, but they were intentional. For the first time in years, I wasn't hurrying for anyone else's sake. At home, I made tea and sat in the backyard. The air carried that faint smell of earth warming after winter. I thought of George then, not in sadness, but in companionship. He would have liked seeing me in that art class. He always said I carried too much worry and not enough color. I looked around the garden, noticing small details I'd stopped seeing. Tiny buds forming on the hydrangeas, a crack in the stepping stone pathway, the bird feeder leaning after a storm. Life had continued while I'd been busy shrinking for the comfort of others. Claire visited that weekend. She stood in the doorway, smiling at the scent of fresh paint coming from the bench outside. "You've been busy," she said. "I have," I replied, handing her a cup of tea. "Feels good." She sat beside me, legs tucked under her the way she used to when she was small. We talked about her classes, her friends, her plans. She spoke with the kind of hopefulness the young wear so naturally, like a coat they don't realize will someday feel heavy. After a pause, she looked at me, serious. "You seem different, Grandma. In a good way." I thought about that. "I think I'm just remembering myself." She squeezed my hand gently. "I'm proud of you." No one had said that to me in a long, long time. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky soft and orange. For once, the quiet around me didn't feel like waiting. It felt like arrival. Not triumph, not revenge, just the simple, steady reclaiming of a life that had always been mine. And as the light faded, I realized I didn't feel small anymore. I just felt present. Daniel called before he came, which was new. A small courtesy that told me he wasn't sure of his place anymore. I told him yes, he could stop by, and after I hung up, I stood for a moment with my hand still on the receiver, feeling a strange calm settle over me, preparing myself, not for battle this time, but for whatever truth would show itself. He arrived alone. No Lena. That in itself felt like a shift in the wind. He walked toward the house slower than usual, as if unsure where to put his feet. When I opened the door, he gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Daniel. Come in." He stepped inside and looked around again, as if expecting to find something changed in the walls or the furniture. Maybe something had changed, but it wasn't the house. We sat in the living room, not across from each other this time, but at an angle. Still distance, but not opposition. He clasped his hands together and exhaled. "Mom?" "I talked to Claire." I nodded. "She mentioned you two spoke. She told me everything you've been feeling, everything you've seen. I didn't realize how much I'd put on you." His voice wavered. "Or how much I took for granted." I watched him carefully, not suspiciously, just honestly. For the first time, Daniel looked like a man who had stopped rehearsing excuses and finally run out of them. "She said," he continued softly, "that you seemed lighter now, happier, and that it wasn't because of anything I'd done. It was because you started doing things for yourself again." There was no bitterness in his tone, just a quiet bewilderment, as though he were meeting a new version of me he didn't know how to speak to yet. "I didn't mean to diminish you," he said. "I just thought—" He rubbed his forehead. "I don't know what I thought. Maybe I assumed you'd always be there to steady things for me, the way you used to." "That's part of the problem," I said gently. "You stopped seeing me as someone with a life of her own." He winced, but he didn't deny it. That alone felt like progress. "I'm trying to understand," he said. "Really understand. Not defend myself. Not argue." He hesitated. "Is there a way back from this? I don't mean to where we were. I know that's gone. But to something better?" I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel that old pull to smooth things over. I didn't feel the ache to fix his guilt or rush to reassure him. The distance between us wasn't a wound anymore. It was simply space. Space I finally needed. "There can be something," I said. "But it won't be built on me yielding or you assuming. It has to be steady, clear, respectful." He nodded slowly. "I can try. I want to try." Trying. A beginning. Not a promise, not a guarantee. But beginnings can be honest even when they're small. We sat quietly after that. The sunlight fell across the coffee table in thin stripes, and Daniel followed the pattern with his eyes, the way he used to as a boy when he was thinking through something too big for him. After a long moment, he said, "Lena won't be coming around much. She doesn't agree with the way things went." I didn't comment. It wasn't my marriage to save. "I need to fix things on my own," he said, "not through you." "That's good," I replied. He smiled then, a real one this time, faint but sincere. "Claire wants to come visit with me next week, if that's all right." "It is." We stood, neither of us reaching for a hug, but neither of us avoiding one if it happened someday. That was enough. At the door, he paused. "Mom? Thank you for not giving up on me." I didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I said, "Thank you for starting to see me." He nodded, almost humbled, and stepped outside. When I closed the door behind him, the house felt balanced. not quiet with loss, not heavy with conflict, just balanced. A place where I could breathe and where the future didn't feel like a threat, but a slow, steady unfolding. The house was calm the morning after Daniel's visit. Not silent. Homes this old don't know how to be silent, but calm in a way that made the air feel clearer, as if dust that had been sitting in corners for years had finally begun to drift away. I moved through the room slowly, touching the back of a chair here, straightening a picture frame there. Small motions, but each one felt like a quiet reclaiming. I took my tea to the backyard and sat on the bench George built. The paint I'd applied last week had already dried into a soft, even blue. He always said blue made a place feel honest. I think he was right. The sky was pale, the kind of morning light that doesn't push itself onto you. It just arrives, softly, steadily. I thought about the last few weeks. How everything began with one piece of paper, one second page, one moment when I saw clearly what I had allowed myself to ignore, and how that single moment had started an unraveling, not of me, but of the illusions I'd wrapped myself in for years. Illusions about my son, about my own strength, about what love is and isn't supposed to tolerate. It surprised me, in a way, how much of my life I'd lived in quiet compromise. Not because I lacked courage, but because I believed yielding was a form of kindness. That patience was always the higher ground. But age teaches you something. Patience never does. There is a difference between peace and silence, between being gentle and being erased. Daniel's change wasn't sudden enlightenment. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a beginning. And I found myself grateful for beginnings, even small ones, even late ones. Life doesn't always give us the endings we want, but it often gives us just enough space to choose differently. Claire visited again that afternoon. She carried 2 pastries from the bakery and a notebook filled with sketches from her art class. She'd signed up after seeing mine. We sat under the budding hydrangeas, eating slowly, talking about nothing and everything. She told me she liked the quiet here, that it felt like the kind of quiet people earn, not the kind they fear. "You seem stronger," she said suddenly. I smiled. Maybe I just stopped pretending I wasn't. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt the warmth of her cheek through my sweater. "I'm glad you fought back," she whispered. I didn't answer right away. I watched a bird hop across the patio stones, tilting its head as if listening to us. Then I said, "It wasn't a fight, sweetheart. It was a remembering." Later, after she left, I stayed outside. The sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across the yard. I felt no triumph, no bitterness, no lingering urge to replay arguments or wonder what I should have said differently. Instead, there was a clean quiet inside me, like a room finally aired out after years of being kept shut. People think dignity is something loud, something you declare. But they're wrong. Dignity is something you return to, quietly, like coming home after being lost for too long. Something no one can give you and no one can take unless you hand it over piece by piece. And I am done handing pieces of myself away. As twilight spread across the yard, I rested my hands on the bench and let my breath settle. I thought of all the women my age who sit alone in kitchens, signing papers they don't fully trust, swallowing doubts to spare the feelings of people who have long stopped sparing theirs. I thought of the weight of quiet loyalty and the cost of letting it go unacknowledged. Then I spoke into the soft evening, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. You deserve better than the second page. A truth simple enough to hold, strong enough to stand on. And if anyone reading this finds a part of themselves inside my story, then let this be your moment to steady your hands, lift your head, and draw that line you've been afraid to draw. Because your life, your home, your voice, they still belong to you. Start acting like they do.